There are things a man can forgive, and then there are things that should never be forgiven. Not because of pride, but because of principle. Every man who's ever loved deeply knows what it feels like to give everything and still be broken. But what if the real danger isn't heartbreak? It's betrayal disguised as love. Today we're going to talk about the moments that should never get a second chance, the lines a woman should never cross, and the price a man pays when he lets those lines blur. Number 1, betrayal of trust. Betrayal of trust is not just about cheating, it's about violating the emotional contract that holds a relationship together. When a man gives his trust to a woman, he's offering her something sacred, his vulnerability. He's not just trusting her with his loyalty or honesty, he's trusting her with his heart, his peace, and his sense of safety in love. A woman who betrays that doesn't just make a mistake, she breaks something inside him that may never fully heal. Because once a man feels that the person he loved most could lie to him, deceive him, or play with his emotions, something inside him hardens. He stops seeing love as warmth and starts seeing it as a risk he can't afford to take again. When trust is broken, it changes the emotional rhythm of the relationship. Everything becomes filtered through suspicion, doubt, and fear. Every word she says, every action she takes, he questions it. And that's the silent poison that slowly kills emotional intimacy. The man who once felt free to open up now starts holding back. He begins to test her words, analyze her tone, and question her motives. This is not because he wants to. It's because betrayal reprograms the brain to expect pain where it once found peace. The relationship becomes a battlefield where love is replaced with defense and connection turns into control. Once that shift happens, there's no going back to how things were before, because the innocence of trust never returns. What makes betrayal of trust so devastating is not just the act itself, but the message behind it. When a woman betrays a man's trust, she's showing him that her needs, desires, or impulses matter more than his emotional safety. It tells him that the bond he cherished was never valued equally. For a man, that realization hits deeper than anger. It hits his identity, because a man's love is tied to his purpose. When he loves, he gives direction, effort, and protection. When that love is betrayed, it's not just his heart that hurts. It's his sense of meaning that collapses. He starts questioning everything. Was I not enough? Did she ever really care? Was it all a lie? Those questions don't fade easily because they attack the very core of masculine devotion. The hardest part of betrayal is that it changes how a man loves. He may forgive on the surface, but deep down he starts to love with caution. He may still give, but he'll hold back the parts of himself that were once open and raw. He'll smile, but it won't reach his eyes the same way. He'll stay, but the emotional bond will feel thinner, weaker, more fragile. And that's why betrayal of trust is something that can't be undone with apologies or tears. Once the thread of safety is broken, even love starts to feel dangerous. A relationship can survive mistakes, arguments, and even distance. But it rarely survives betrayal, because once trust is gone, so is the foundation that made love possible in the first place. Number 2, disrespect and contempt. Disrespect and contempt are the slow poisons that kill a relationship from the inside out. They don't always start loud. Sometimes they begin with a tone, a look, a sarcastic comment that's brushed off as a joke. But over time, those small moments of disregard accumulate and turn into emotional corrosion. When a woman starts speaking to a man as if his opinions don't matter, when she rolls her eyes at his efforts or mocks his emotions, she's not just expressing frustration, she's chipping away at his dignity. And for a man, dignity is not just pride, it's the anchor of his masculine energy. When he feels disrespected by the person he loves most, it hits deeper than words. It shakes the very sense of worth he builds his life around. Every relationship has disagreements, but there's a difference between conflict and contempt. Conflict can still exist within love. It's two people trying to understand each other. Contempt, however, is the absence of respect. It's when she stops seeing him as her partner and starts seeing him as her project, or worse, her enemy. When she belittles his effort, mocks his dreams, or uses his vulnerabilities as ammunition, she's not solving problems. She's creating wounds. And the dangerous thing about contempt is that it doesn't stay contained. Once it enters the emotional space of a relationship, it spreads like a virus. It changes how they speak, how they look at each other, how they interpret everything the other person does. Love cannot breathe in an atmosphere poisoned by contempt. A man can handle rejection, but disrespect from the woman he loves cuts differently. It doesn't just hurt his feelings, it drains his drive. A man's motivation often flows from the sense that he's valued, that his presence makes a difference. When he feels appreciated, he expands. He works harder, loves deeper, and gives more. But when he's met with constant criticism or ridicule, he starts to shrink. He withdraws, not because he's weak, but because every word of contempt reminds him that he's fighting for connection in a place where his soul isn't safe. Over time, he becomes emotionally numb, not out of choice, but as a defense mechanism. It's easier for him to detach than to keep absorbing the pain of being disrespected by someone he gave everything to. Disrespect also signals something much larger, the loss of polarity. In a healthy dynamic, feminine energy softens masculine energy, while masculine strength provides direction and safety. But when disrespect enters the picture, that natural balance collapses. The man feels attacked instead of supported, and the woman loses her softness because she no longer feels admiration. What used to be attraction turns into resentment. Conversations become battles, affection becomes duty, and silence becomes the only way to avoid another round of contempt. Once respect is gone, emotional intimacy dies quietly, and that's why no amount of love, attraction, or history can sustain a relationship where one partner constantly disrespects the other, because disrespect doesn't just wound, it devalues, and once value is lost, connection loses its meaning. Number 3, manipulative behavior. Manipulative behavior is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional control because it hides behind the illusion of care. It's subtle at first, a guilt trip disguised as love, a silent treatment framed as needing space, or emotional pressure masked as vulnerability. But over time, manipulation erodes the natural balance of a relationship. When a woman uses emotional tactics to get her way, whether it's crying to escape accountability, twisting words to win an argument, or using affection as a weapon, she's not trying to connect, she's trying to control. And control and love cannot coexist. Love is about freedom, trust, and choice, while manipulation thrives on confusion, guilt, and dependency. Once a man realizes he's being emotionally cornered, something in him begins to disconnect. Not because he stops caring, but because he starts sensing that his emotions are being used against him. What makes manipulation so destructive is that it doesn't always look wrong from the outside. It often masquerades as emotional intelligence, as if she just knows how to handle him. But what she's really doing is learning how to press his emotional buttons to get the reaction she wants. It might look like kindness when she apologizes sweetly after pushing him too far, or concern when she constantly questions his choices, but underneath it all lies control. And once a man falls into that loop, he starts doubting his own judgment. He begins to question whether he's the problem, whether he's too harsh, too distant, or too cold. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't just change how he sees her, it changes how he sees himself. It disorients him until he can no longer tell the difference between love and emotional captivity. The real damage of manipulative behavior is psychological. It turns the relationship into a performance where he's constantly trying to avoid upsetting her, constantly monitoring his tone, his choices, his words. He stops expressing himself honestly because he knows honesty will be used against him later. He stops setting boundaries because every time he does, she reacts with anger, tears, or silence. Slowly, he loses his voice. And a man without a voice in his own relationship becomes emotionally paralyzed. He's there physically, but mentally he's exhausted, drained by the constant effort of maintaining peace with someone who thrives on emotional imbalance. What's worse is that manipulative behavior is addictive for the one who uses it. The more she succeeds, the more she relies on it, until it becomes her default way of maintaining control. Over time, this dynamic destroys emotional safety. The man stops trusting her reactions, and she stops respecting his strength. The relationship becomes a power struggle rather than a partnership. Every act of affection begins to feel conditional. Every disagreement turns into a trap, and every moment of closeness feels like a setup for the next emotional ambush. Manipulation may win small battles, but it loses the war of intimacy. Because when love turns into a game of control, it stops being love altogether. It becomes survival, and no soul can thrive where it constantly has to defend itself from the person it loves most. Number 4, public humiliation. Public humiliation is one of the deepest forms of emotional betrayal because it strips a man of his dignity in front of others. It's not just an argument or a disagreement that happens to spill out in public. It's an intentional act of exposing his flaws, mocking his weaknesses, or belittling his efforts in front of people who are not part of the relationship. When a woman does this, she's not expressing anger, she's asserting power. Public humiliation is about control, about showing that she can dominate him emotionally, even in the presence of others. For a man, dignity is not about ego, it's about respect. And when that respect is shattered publicly, it leaves a scar that apologies cannot heal. He might stay silent in the moment, but inside, something breaks. Because when the woman he loves becomes the one who embarrasses him, he loses not only trust in her, but in the love itself. Humiliation attacks a man's masculine identity in a way few other things can. Men are naturally wired to protect, to lead, to stand tall, not in arrogance, but in purpose. When he's mocked, insulted, or undermined in front of others, it crushes that sense of strength. It's not just about what was said, it's about the message behind it, that she no longer sees him as worthy of respect. Once a woman publicly disrespects her man, she tells the world that she no longer values him. That moment redefines the relationship in his mind. He can no longer see her as his safe space because she's become the one who exposes him to shame. And once shame enters love, connection dies a quiet death. The damage of public humiliation goes beyond the surface. It changes how he shows up in the relationship afterward. He becomes quieter, more distant, less open. He starts walking on emotional eggshells, afraid that any disagreement might lead to another public scene. This emotional caution kills authenticity. He no longer feels free to be himself, because being himself might come with punishment, mockery, exposure, or ridicule. The relationship turns into a performance where he's constantly managing her emotions, trying to prevent another episode of disrespect. The more he tries to please her, the less she respects him, because in her eyes, submission only reinforces her power. It becomes a toxic loop where both lose. He loses confidence, and she loses admiration. Public humiliation also reveals something deeper about the woman who does it. It's a reflection of her own insecurity and need for dominance. A woman who truly values love will protect her man's image even when she's angry. She'll hold his dignity as sacred because she understands that respect sustains love more than passion ever will. But when a woman attacks her man publicly, it shows she's no longer fighting for the relationship, she's fighting for superiority. And once a relationship turns into a competition, it stops being a partnership. Public humiliation doesn't just hurt the man, it weakens the entire bond, because love cannot survive in a place where one person feels small, so the other can feel powerful. Number 5. Weaponizing vulnerability. Weaponizing vulnerability is one of the most cruel and destructive things a woman can do in a relationship, because it takes what was once sacred and turns it into ammunition. When a man opens up emotionally, it's not something that comes easily or naturally. It takes courage for him to share his fears, insecurities, or past wounds. He does it because he believes he's in a safe space with someone who will protect his truth, not punish him for it. But when that same vulnerability is later used against him, in arguments, in manipulation, or in moments of anger, it cuts deeper than any betrayal. It tells him that even his most honest self is not safe in love. And once a man learns that his pain can be turned into a weapon, he stops showing it. He retreats behind silence, not because he doesn't feel, but because he no longer trusts that what he feels will be treated with care. The emotional damage that comes from weaponized vulnerability is profound. A man's openness is often misunderstood as weakness, but in truth, it's an act of trust. When that trust is broken, he starts associating intimacy with danger. Every future connection becomes harder, colder, more guarded. He might still love, but he'll never open up in the same way again. The woman who weaponizes his vulnerability doesn't just win an argument, she loses the part of him that was real. She teaches him to perform emotional distance as self-protection. He becomes the man who listens but doesn't share, who stays but doesn't reveal, who loves but never fully lets anyone in again. This kind of emotional shutdown doesn't happen overnight. It's built through repeated moments of betrayal disguised as honesty. Weaponizing vulnerability often happens subtly, wrapped in phrases like, "I'm just being honest," or "you're too sensitive." But behind those words is an intention to wound, to remind him of the very things he once shared in trust. She might bring up his past mistakes, mock his emotional scars, or throw his confessions back at him when she wants to gain control. Every time she does, she reinforces a message that love is not a place of healing, but a battlefield. Over time, he starts suppressing his emotions to survive the relationship. The connection becomes one-sided. She demands transparency, but punishes truth. And the irony is that while she might feel powerful in those moments, she's actually destroying the foundation of emotional intimacy that real love needs to survive. Once a man feels unsafe emotionally, love loses its meaning. It's not affection he seeks anymore, it's distance, a way to protect what's left of his inner peace. When vulnerability is weaponized, it teaches a man that silence is safer than honesty, that distance is easier than openness, and that love can become the very source of his pain. And once he reaches that realization, no apology, no affection, no promise can undo the damage. Because what she broke wasn't just his trust. It was his belief that love could ever be a safe place to fall. Number 6, false accusations or character assassination. False accusations and character assassination are forms of betrayal that go beyond emotional pain. They attack a man's very identity. When a woman falsely accuses a man or twists his words and actions to paint him as someone he's not, she isn't just trying to hurt his feelings. She's trying to destroy his credibility, his integrity, and the way others see him. For a man, reputation is not about vanity. It's about honor. It's the reflection of how he lives, what he stands for, and the respect he earns through his actions. When a woman, especially one he trusted and loved, decides to tarnish that with lies or exaggerated narratives, it's not a mistake born of emotion. It's a calculated act of emotional violence, because once a man's name is damaged, it doesn't matter what the truth is. The stain of accusation lingers long after the storm has passed. False accusations hit deeper because they exploit the world's tendency to believe the victim first, especially when the accusation comes from a woman. A man in this position often finds himself trapped. If he defends himself, he looks defensive. If he stays silent, people assume guilt. It's a no-win situation that isolates him mentally and emotionally. The pain isn't just in the lies, it's in watching the people he thought would stand by him start to question who he really is. The woman who does this knows exactly how much power her words hold, and when she uses that power to destroy, it reveals not just cruelty, but a complete lack of empathy. She turns the love he once gave her into leverage, twisting private moments and emotional truths into weapons that cut through his public and private life. Character assassination doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it's done in whispers, subtle comments to friends, hints on social media, quiet stories that make him look like the problem. She may not openly accuse him, but she plants seeds of doubt in the minds of others. Over time, those seeds grow into assumptions, and assumptions grow into judgment. This slow poisoning of his image can ruin his peace, his confidence, even his future relationships. He starts living under a shadow of something he didn't do, explaining himself for crimes of character that never existed. And while she might gain temporary validation from playing the victim, the emotional and psychological cost to him is permanent, because there is no defense strong enough against someone who knows your truth and chooses to distort it for control or revenge. The most painful part is that false accusations don't just harm his reputation. They change who he becomes. A man who's been falsely accused carries a quiet rage and a deep distrust that's hard to unlearn. He starts to see love as a risk, not a refuge. He guards his words, hides his emotions, and builds walls that no one can easily climb. Once a woman chooses to assassinate a man's character, she kills something far more valuable than his image. She kills his faith in fairness, in honesty, in love itself. Because once truth is replaced with manipulation and loyalty with betrayal, what remains isn't just heartbreak, it's the slow death of a man's belief that love can exist without destruction. Gentlemen, remember this: forgiveness has its place, but not at the cost of your self-respect. When a woman crosses lines that damage your trust, your dignity, or your peace, it's not strength to tolerate it, it's self-betrayal. Protect your heart the way you protect your purpose. Real love will never require you to lose yourself to keep it alive. Sometimes walking away isn't bitterness, it's clarity. And the moment you choose truth over tolerance, you stop being a victim of love and start becoming a man of value.